viewers of Mpumakapa TV, listeners of Nkqubela FM, welcome again to our series of lectures as Amaqhawe Ethu. You know, we celebrate the heritage of celebrate amaqhawe azabalazileyo nezinto ezenzekileyo ngexesha lomzabalazo. Namhlanje siniphathele ubhuti Nyamezeli Boy wayesakuba inkokheli yabafundi kwi-COSAS, wayinkokheli yabasebenzi kwiSARU, wayinkokheli yasepalamente engummeli ngunyana ke walapha eSouth Africa, kuba uyafumaneka eRhafu, uyafumaneka eKapa nalapha eBhayi, unalo nebango kanti ukhe wahlala wangumhlali apha eBhayi ngenxa yalo mzabalazo ngathi naseTinarha. So we're having that. Who's going to be sharing with us their experiences as activists in the 80s kusenziwa lo mzabalazo. Bunyani, let me welcome you over to our program and thank for availing yourself. We welcome you. Over to you.
Yeah. Good afternoon to the viewers and good afternoon to everybody. I welcome the opportunity to be able to reflect on a generation that has made a contribution from 1970 after the Black Consciousness movement was banned. We got ourselves involved in SAZIM, and after that SAZIM was banned, we got ourselves involved into formation of the Congress of South African Students in 1979. And throughout that, we've been quite determined. When we joined the Congress of South African Students, it was quite clear that as a student movement, we would have to be able to link up with those that have been in the tradition of the Congress movement itself. So part of us started to get involved in the underground movement and linking up with the African National Congress. So from 1979, we were quite explicitly saying to ourselves that the unbanning of the African National Congress has started. The link with our people on the ground has started, and that work had to be done. So our own contribution as the as the Congress of South African Students, and our linkages to the democratic movement called the African National Congress is what makes me to be able to come to the viewers and talk about our generation, its own contribution, and be able to say to our generation, when the movement is facing challenges, where is our generation? The type of training that we got through and the type of being able to face the apartheid regime, that determination and fearlessness, what happened to it? As it's being shown and it's being reflected, that since we met, since 1979 in the Congress of South African Students, and being able to go into the underground structures, and being able to build a united democratic movement, all that contribution and all that messages that we've been able to be trained of how to be able to lead our people to understand the challenges that they were confronted with. We're able to carry ourselves in a very responsible, very disciplined manner, and being able to become the voice of our people, and being able to link with the poor of the poorest, and be able to give them an interpretation and a framework of the type of society would love to be able to live under. So when we took up the Freedom Charter, that was one of our documents that we did, and what Tambo said we should be able to do, promote and be able to interpret the Freedom Charter that the people shall govern. These were the calls that we got ourselves into. And this is the document that has been adopted in 1955. We took it to our people and remade them to rethink and link up with the Congress movement and the history of the Congress movement. So the African National Congress, faced with these different challenges, and with the regime saying that the African National Congress is dead, it will never come back, we're able to defeat the regime ideologically. We're able to reject what the regime was trying to entrench into our minds. We're able to accept what the role that Steve Biko have played, that black men on your own, you should be able to de-link with what the colonialists have introduced to you through their education, and be able to confront the colonialists and tell them where we are, and tell them that their indoctrination would never stop us into what we believe in. We believe in that as a black child, as an African, you must be able to resist what the apartheid regime has introduced through the Verwoerd education system. And that's where we were as the Congress of South African Students. And that was our determination. That's why we started to talk of the education charter. That's why we started to link the education charter to the role of saying that our role as COSAS has to be, how do we build a better education system that rejects the class content of the apartheid regime, that makes sure that we look for an education system that will improve the life of an African child, that will be able to give them a better future. When we say education has to be dynamic, that's what we did. In our own introduction as COSAS, we said, before we become students, we come from a community, from a society. And it means that whatever we do, whatever type of education that we are getting as students, has to be linked to the material conditions that we come from. We come from squatter camps. We come from the poor of the poorest. And those material conditions influence who we became during our struggle. The struggle against apartheid, the type of material conditions that we were confronted with, was what made us to be determined, was what made us to be able to link up with the African National Congress. Because we realized that those challenges wouldn't be resolved by only getting into the SRCs or calling for the SRCs. But what we did in 1980 in Port Elizabeth, when we first strike after the 1976 boycott, we called for free education, but we were very aware that we would never get that free education under an apartheid regime. Would have to link that free education to the destruction of the apartheid itself. So when we started in Port Elizabeth, Port Elizabeth was the first one led by Umkose and the different people that were there. Student leaders, Abamzuli Sichasi, we all converge and says, with the group from Port Elizabeth, SRCs from Cape Town, and we started to put a forum together. And we said, we are very clear that we are not taking a boycott as the final end, but we are saying a boycott is a means to an end. And that's what made us to be able to engage, because without us being able to resist what the apartheid regime was introducing indoctrination in different schools, we would not be able to say to the regime that so far you come to an end in how you think you could be able to indoctrinate young people, the youth of this particular country. That's how we got ourselves into this struggle. So when we got through Section 22, Section 6, and Section 10, we're able to meet as all the different student leaders in our detention in Motapi, the first detentions, the longest that we have ever been together. But our students, because of our link with the students on the ground, because we're accountable as SRC leaders to those students, they rejected to go back to school because of the relationship that we had with them. We were quite clear that we were student leaders and student leaders that have been elected by students, and our presence in those institutions and our rejection of the apartheid education was linked to what the students were looking for, and our demand for end of the prefect system and the introduction of the Student Representative Council was quite linked to the rejection of the type of leadership or the type of homeland leaders that were being created. Then we said, with us at schools, we can't get into the prefect system. The prefect system, that type of leadership, is a creation of what the apartheid regime was looking for. And we are different from that. That's the type of youth leaders and generation you're talking about the 1980 generation, founded within the infrastructure and found within building the mass democratic movement. And it's quite clear when we said would link up with our parents were workers, our parents were peasants. And when we said those courses, before you become a student, link up with those parents. So we became part of Makosa and being able to mobilize that democratic movement. We're able to link up with the worker struggles that were taking place during that period. We're able to link up with the Wilson Roundtree and being able to understand what implication it has to be able to live and to be able to link with those different struggles. With our boss, Pruam Tumkolo, we're very eloquent into saying that our struggles would not only end up at school, but our struggles would be able to be linked up with what happens in our communities. That's why we're able to assist in the formation of PEPCO, in the formation of Makosa. That's how we linked up. And that's how we started to be engaged as a generation. And we moved on, as you are saying, every time yearly on the 8th of January, as OR Tambo makes his announcement of what the NEC of the African National Congress would be saying, would link up with that and take that, not as propaganda, but as a commitment that the information that is being, the type of statement that he has made, make the country ungovernable, would have to be able to take that down to the different people on the ground and talk to them that this is what is being expected, that you can't allow the apartheid regime to entrench itself and react as if it's representing our society. The apartheid regime would treat it illegitimate, and it's not representatives of our people. That's why we're to make sure that our student struggles were linked up with calling for those that are in Robben Island and in all different prisons to be released, because we never recognize the homeland systems and their leaders. We never recognize the apartheid regime and their systems. We never recognize the different structures of the local government that were being created we wanted the leaders, all of them, to be released. And right through the 80s, we were representatives of those young people who were able to express and being able to resist throughout our detentions. The death of our friends and the death of our comrades remains as part of what has made us to be more determined to bring down the apartheid regime. As they were trying to make sure that whom have gone out and being able to do the work and link up with the underground, and they were being detained and being poisoned by the apartheid regime. But our determination has always been to introduce the African National Congress and revive its own structures to link up with our people. We've been able to make sure that throughout Umkhonto we and its role within as an armed wing, because we were very clear as students that we don't have a capacity to introduce or to be able to take up the armed struggle or start our own army. But we should be able to link up with the underground structures of Umkhonto so that we popularize the armed struggle among as part of the solutions of defeating the apartheid regime. And that we have been successful up until we started the negotiation process. After we have started with our consensus and with our engagement with different organizations into putting together a mass democratic movement. Because we have always believed as COSAS and as different student leaders that would never be able to bring down the apartheid regime on ourselves. But the broader unity of our society and the broader unity of with our communities is essential in any struggle that will take place. And we're not being paternalistic or only thinking that the Congress movement will be the only movement that will bring down the apartheid regime. We're to go back and look for the Black consciousness leaders and re-link up with them and say to them, can we work together? We're to go and look for POSACs and the religious people to be able to bring all of us together under a formation called the United Democratic Front. Because the unity of the oppressed was quite important for all of us to defeat the apartheid regime. And that was the weapon that I'm asking. What has happened to the unity of the oppressed in defeating unemployment, in defeating inequality, in defeating the exploitation of the working class? Because you can't do without being able to make sure that the workers themselves, wherever they are located, enjoys the selling of the labor power, so that as workers, they themselves should be able to free themselves from capitalism or class exploitation. These are all the ideologies that we're holding together. That's our linkages with religious people, the linkages with communities, the linkages with society or the working class itself, was to determine to bring down the apartheid regime. We're not ambitious, or we didn't see that will defeat capitalism through that process only. But what we were interested with, it's how do we bring unity amongst all the oppressed. And we said that remained as a lesson as we conducted the revolution, that never worked in opposition or in conflict with the different political organizations. Find each other, and then your enemy remains to be those that are exploiting. Your enemy remains in inequality. Your enemy remains being poverty. These are the things that must always bring us together and make us to be united. As long as that we have not defeated poverty, as long as that we have not defeated inequality, then it means that as a generation, there is a responsibility that we are waiting for. And we should be able to continue with the unity that we've built amongst ourselves, the unity that we've built, and the unity that is being shown today in what is called coalition in the metro itself. That is the unity that we are looking for. That let's unite in defeating poverty. Let's unite in fighting inequality. Because without that unity, no democratic system would ever be successful without those that are feeling the pain being united in defeating with those that are creating unemployment, with those that are creating poverty, with those that are creating inequality. That has always been our goal, and that has always been our determination, that we should always make sure that, thank you, to make sure that those that are in different communities should always be united and should always be behind us. Your love for your organization, we love the African National Congress. We understood its policies, but we understood that it has to be united with different forces within communities and different forces within our society, and unite and be determined to fight against class exploitation, to fight against apartheid itself. But in the current times, we should all be united and working very hard to make sure that the inequalities that is facing our communities, the poverty that is confronting our communities, we are united against that. And our organizations and our strength should be able to use. So we are saying to the generation, let's unite and go back to our communities and ask for more unity so that we're able to defeat inequality, we're able to defeat poverty. Because this liberation and this democracy, we should be able to unite on how we fight against landlessness. Land is important, land is valuable for our own prosperity, and we should be able to unite. Let's use the democracy effectively to defeat inequality, to defeat poverty, and defeat landlessness. And that's why our focus is supposed to be as a generation, because all what we're fighting for has been well captured by those that were united in 1955. In 1955, when they were able to put together the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter, we understood that it never belonged to one party. We understood as the demands that were being put together by South Africans. And the value of that was being able to say as South Africans, this is our demand. And the first introduction when we entered the Congress movement was saying, do you understand the Freedom Charter? Are you able to interpret? That's why the Constitution itself that we're talking to says for these freedoms will be united, fighting side by side until we get this freedom. And that was our understanding. And that was our theme throughout the revolution, that we would always be united and working with our people and making sure that the freedom that we are fighting for is able to give and able to make sure that our people participate into it and they make their contribution. And that's what, when you say mass democratic movement and democratic participation, we have been always being able to make sure that our people and their voice is being listened to. Never be arrogant, never alienate those people, work with them, and being able to make sure that the ultimate aim is to make inequality and poverty to be destroyed and to be restricted by the type of governance that we have been able to put together and the type of economy that we have been able to decide and be able to make sure that it answers to the needs of our people. And that is what we're calling for. And that's what we're asking our generation, that participate in local government, participate in province, you have got the necessary skills now after 1994 to be able to use your education to assist with the transformation agenda. We need good public servants who are going to be loyal to the democratic processes. And it means that the education that you have got, the skills that you have got as an engineer, one thing that you must appraise and be able to be excited about is that since 1994, we have produced quite a number of young people who have been able to pass in universities and who have been able to pass at high school. Let them be able to be drawn into by government and be used and be effective into making sure that they contribute to the democratic process. We need those skills, because without them, we'll never be able to defeat inequality. Without them, we'll never be able to defeat poverty. Without them, we'll never be able to make sure that everybody enjoys the democratic privileges that we have been benefiting by what we have done and the sacrifices that we have done throughout the 80s. That's what the negotiation processes have been about. Has been to empower, has been about defeating inequality, defeating poverty, defeating landlessness. That is what the generation of the 1980s must be able to do. Thank you.